On today's episode of the Retro Gamers podcast, John Story returns to the show for a special retro spotlight on the ZX Spectrum, followed by a special interview with British computer enthusiast Don Crawford. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Retro Gamers podcast, episode 423. Anthony here, and joining me on this week's episode, you've seen him a few times this year, my good friend John. John, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Anthony.
Well, always a pleasure having you, especially with these specific episodes, because I feel like before you came along, we never really covered a lot of the computer side of retro gaming. There was some Commodore 64 action. Maybe we'd talk an Apple once in a while or an Amiga, and it was very, very brief. But since you've come along, we've really started to dive into the just retro computer gaming, for which I'm always grateful because it's a side of the gaming industry that I didn't have a lot of knowledge of, and you always bring that, which I'm grateful for.
I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any of this, but I certainly love it. I love these old 8 and 16-bit computers that, we frequently end up talking about.
Yeah, and judging by your computer room, you definitely know your way around these just a bit.
A little bit.
Yeah. But we got some good stuff. We have some good stuff planned for this episode. First off, we have a really good interview coming up a little bit later. Actually, John, with somebody you introduced me to, Don Crawford, who we sat down with, and he also has a very specific experience with retro computer gaming, more on the British side of things.
Yeah, Don is really the go-to guy, at least on the East Coast. Certainly the only American I've ever met that has such a deep knowledge of the British 8-bit micros like the ZX Spectrum and the Amstrad CPC. He not only is he intimately familiar with the history and a lot of the software that went with him, he also is the go-to guy for repairs. And that's how I met him. I actually bought a ZX Spectrum, a 128, updated ZX Spectrum. The Brits call it ZX Spectrum. I bought that from him, and that's how I met him. We took up a conversation, and we became internet friends, I guess. Chatted back and forth quite a bit, and he actually came out here, in which you'll see in the next segment, to visit him and his wife, and they're lovely people, and he is really a font of knowledge when it comes to this stuff. Far more knowledgeable than I, certainly on the repair side.
But before we get to that interview, what I thought would be really cool was to take the ZX Spectrum and do a little bit of a retro spotlight on it. Not a full episode retro spotlight like we normally do, but just a little brief history of the ZX Spectrum, and just kind of how awesome it was. So let's jump right into that. And John, obviously, feel free to throw any type of information or comments or stories at me as we go through this. But the ZX Spectrum was first released in the UK. It was developed in the UK by Sinclair Research, which was founded by Clive Sinclair, named the company after himself. And this was released on April 23rd, 1982 in the UK. It was later released in the US November of 1983, and then went out to the rest of the EU somewhere around 1984. So there was a bit of a release window there. It was a pretty large window. Yeah. So it's 125 pounds. US was $200. Overall sales for this, it was discontinued in 1985 in the UK, and then ultimately in 1992. I see what you're holding up right there.
This is kind of the American version of the ZX Spectrum. This is kind of what we got. It was sold by Timex.
Yes.
Yeah, so it says Timex Sinclair on it.
That would be the Timex Sinclair 2068, if I'm not mistaken.
1500.
Oh, 1500. Okay.
Yeah. Yep, this was their attempt to break into the market here. It wasn't very successful. They had the Sinclair 1000, which was really kind of like a copy of the ZX80, which predated the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and it's very, very simple. Like, I got the box right here. Horrible, horrible. The worst keyboard ever put on a computer. Just design flaw after design flaw, but it was dirt cheap, like $100.
Yes,
You couldn't do a lot with it, but
and I was going to
still a
say,
neat. And that's one of Don's favorite computers. I think it might. I think he probably talked about it be one of his first. So
yeah. Well, I was going to say about the keyboard. You're talking about the rubber keyboard, which people kind of
no, the rubber keyboard was a significant upgrade. It was
oh,
a membrane keyboard, and it had almost no tactile feedback. It was
oh wow.
horrific.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
it
thought you
made
were
the Atari 400 seem like a dream because I also
ugh,
had a membrane keyboard, but it was much better.
that's saying a lot. Well, no, because the rubber
Yeah.
keyboard I think was on the well, I guess was on the UK release, and
Oh yeah,
from my research, people would equate it to like touching human flesh when they were typing.
I
That
will
was
say this about it. It was a big upgrade from the membrane keyboard, and
mhm.
unlike that satin plastic rubber that they introduced on particularly like Sony and on electronics in the 90s, it's aged well. Like it hasn't disintegrated or anything. I've dealt with worse. The rubber keyed wonder is what they call it in the UK. Is actually a significant upgrade because a lot of these people started with the previous computer, the ZX80 or
Mm.
81. So it was even though yeah it doesn't necessarily feel great. It still it gives you a little bit of feedback.
It gives a little
It's a
feed.
significant. Yeah,
All right.
it's not terrible,
Well,
and it was cheap and it was very very small and yeah.
not bad overall for synthesized flesh, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
And like you said it wasn't a very successful computer maybe in the US. So, but overall, the Spectrum sold about 5 million units. Um, and like I said in 1982 when it launched, there were two versions of it. One was a 16K, one 16 kilobytes, one was 48 kilobytes. And it was released with, again, I'm trying to pull up the information as we're talking about it. It was bundled with, I should say, it was called the Horizons Software Starter Pack when you bought the ZX Spectrum. And it was a cassette because a lot of the software or games that you played with actually came on a cassette. John's holding one up right now. What game are you holding up?
This is a hugely popular game in the UK. It's called Roland on the Ropes,
Nice.
and yeah, it's a little platformer style game, early style of platformer. Very very popular in the UK. Yeah.
Very cool. So yeah, so the Horizons Software Starter Pack was a compilation that came with the Spectrum. Side A consisted of six tutorials to just teach you an overview of the hardware and computing lessons so you can use the system. And then side B had eight different programs on it. Some of those programs were a game called Through the Wall, which was basically Breakout. There was a bubble sorting game called Bubble Sort. There was a version of the board game, Game of Life, called Life, and a few other games on there. So basically, eight different things. So that's what you got when you got the Spectrum. I'm not sure if that was included in the US release. I'm gonna assume it wasn't because the US release came about a year later, and by that time there were like a ton of other things available. But I didn't get any
Yeah,
information
I
about
think
that.
yeah, there is so much competition in the US and I don't think that the need for ultra cheap computers was what it was in the UK. I mean, we had our cheap computers here as well. My first computer was a rubber keyed Wonder Tandy Radio Shack MC10. It was very similar build, same size, little rubber chiclet keys. Like almost like no RAM, like 2 or 3 kilobytes of RAM with a 16K expansion on the back. So we had our own kind of cheapo computers here, our homegrown stuff. But
Hmm.
most everybody I knew by the time Timex Sinclair started releasing these things here were using, like Commodore 64s or VIC 20s before that, or um, you know, uh, IBM PC or PC knockoffs like Tandy's were very popular when I
Yeah.
was a kid, or a Coco color computer was also cheaper. So we had a lot of competition here. The Brits, they really, I mean, we just didn't get these computers in the numbers that they did over there. It's kind of a shame. I just don't think there was room in the market here. Although I think had they done a better job of marketing it and brought some of the games over, particularly on cassette for the people that really didn't have the money, I think they could have done a lot better if they'd marketed it better. And I think so many computer and video game failures, like system failures, comes down to marketing.
Yeah.
And they just, I don't think they put a lot of Timex wasn't dumping tons of money in marketing, and I don't think Sinclair had the money because, like, if Micro Men is a movie I think we referenced in when Don and I were
Yep.
talking. It's all about Sinclair research and the downfall of it, why it fell apart. But I won't retread that here. But the other issue is by the time they were trying to push this stuff here, I don't think they had a lot of extra money to go around. Like there were a lot of these British companies barely had the money to get by. Like the Sinclair was in the running to get the BBC computer project. Like there was a big competition between all the British computer makers because the BBC wanted to come up with a standard. They called it literally the BBC Micro. And they lost out to another company, Acorn. So had they, like, history could have been completely different. Let's
Mm.
imagine that they had become the BBC, a ZX Spectrum, or maybe some follow-on of the ZX Spectrum becomes the BBC Micro. Suddenly they got an influx of cash from the UK government, and now they could have marketed more here, but they just didn't have that. I don't think they had. It was just too small of a company. Plus,
Mm.
Clive Sinclair was so focused on trying to make an electric car. I'll generously call it a car,
Mm.
which was a complete failure. And it just took so much money. It really was the reason why they ended up getting bought out by their competitor, Amstrad.
The other problem too, I think, with
Yeah.
the U.S. launch too, is if it launched in the summer of '83, that wasn't too far off from the video game collapse that seemed to happen around the same time. And
Yeah.
if you were trying to push this in a competitive market with home computers, obviously you're going to struggle there. But then if you're trying to sell it on the aspect of the games that it has, you were going to fail there as well because of the crash that was going on. So,
And that was really its only strength, in my opinion. Like its productivity software, I was never very impressed with it. I mean,
mhm.
I'm not an expert, but I think that the system's main strength was as a games machine. I think for a lot of young British, gamers, this was their Nintendo because austerity measures that were in place in the UK meant most people couldn't afford a Nintendo. Nintendo Entertainment System did not succeed in the UK anywhere like it did in the
Mm.
US. It just they were the purse strings were very tight. So this provided parents, kind of an opportunity to provide a games machine for their kids, but also something they could write papers in theory
Right.
or learn their maths. They always put an S on the end of that for some reason over
The
there.
maths. You don't
Learn
know the
their
maths?
maths.
Let's get back to the Spectrum. Just a few other
Yeah,
things to mention with the Spectrum. Obviously, it was very well received in the UK.
yeah.
Not as well received overseas, as we said. Around 1985 was somewhere around the time in the UK they started to call for the end of the computer boom, which was around the time it started to wane, the popularity of Spectrum. But at that point, even, in those 3 years, this thing released a numerous amount of peripherals, later models, and things like that. And I don't know if you know the difference between the different models, John, but just looking at the list of them was
Yeah,
was fun. So there
there's a
was,
lot.
yeah. So after the Spectrum, there was the ZX Spectrum Plus in 1984, and then in 1985 they had the ZX Spectrum 128, which I think is
Yeah,
self-explanatory.
that's what's playing right behind me. Yeah.
That's the one behind you, the 128.
Yeah,
Nice.
Castlevania for the ZX Spectrum.
Love it. And then after that came, and I don't know the difference between these, but these are the Amstrad models. But the ZX Spectrum Plus 2,
Yep.
the ZX Spectrum Plus 3, these all came out a year apart. 86 for the Plus 2, 87 for the Plus 3. And then After all of that, there was a ZX Spectrum plus 2A, plus 2B, and plus 3B.
It's
So,
not confusing at all. I'm
no.
not an expert on the nuances between them. I mean, the main thing is here's the two main things that all these models kind of incorporated by the time they got to the pluses. They, because the original ZX Spectrum or ZX Spectrum had little to no sound output. It didn't really have
Hmm.
sound. It had a beeper, I think. So most games either had no sound or really bad sound. And I could be wrong. Maybe Sinclair did this before they got bought out, but for sure uh, once Amstrad bought them out, they reissued these computers ad nauseum, different variations. But the main thing that they're adding, aside from 128K of RAM, which was a huge upgrade,
Hmm.
was a sound chip. I think it's something similar to what might have been in uh, like maybe that was like the Tandy sound chip or the Coleco sound chip. Don't
Yeah.
quote me on that. It was pretty simple but massive upgrade. So, like good chip tune sound. It was nice. There's a lot of nice, and I think it was the same sound chip that was in the competitor, the Amstrad CPC 464. I mean, those two computers kind of were the main competition for each other, and
Okay.
the CPC always had better color and better sound than the ZX Spectrum. And plus, the ZX Spectrum had this color clash thing. So, like when you had a character sprite walk next to like a ladder or another sprite, the two colors would actually overlap, and suddenly part of
Oh,
the ladder color might go onto your character sprite. And they called it color clash. But if you grew up with this, it's actually kind of nostalgic. It's not necessarily a negative. I will say with the later systems, if it's a game programmed specifically for the plus systems, the ZX Spectrum Plus, like 128B, A, whatever. I don't know offhand what the differences were in all those, but I will say that I think those systems had the capability to have a little less color clash.
mm,
But there's a lot of games developed for these systems today. So there's and frankly a lot of free games that are also released. So
well, the
like
free
I think
games
it's
are always going to be there.
itch.io. Yeah, well, there's that itch.io is like
Yep.
a huge uh, like repository of software that you can buy or get free. And a lot of the games for the Spectrum and the new ones are coming out, or the new Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum Next.
Hmm.
It's the new systems that they're producing that were imagined what if Sinclair had stayed together in the 90s, what would have the next
Happened.
iteration of the system looked like, right? Those games tend to be kind of like pay what you want. So if you
Okay.
want to be a cheapskate and not support the developer, you can pay nothing and get the game, or you can pay a buck or five or whatever. It's a pretty generous model, I would say. Like if you're a very poor gamer, I think, or a kid, I get it. But if you have a decent day job, you probably should support the developers, particularly if the game is reviewed well when you go to download it. But yeah, there's a lot of games for this that work
Agreed.
on the old systems on as well as the ZX Spectrum Next, and a lot of them are produced in Eastern Europe and Russia.
Just to go back to the spectrums, just a few things about the differences between them, because while you were talking about it, I actually did want to find out. But the Spectrum Plus 2 was basically the ZX Spectrum 128, just released as under the Amstrad name. It did have an integrated cassette recorder, instead
Yes,
of,
of course, that's a huge difference. Yeah.
yeah, which they called a data quarter or data quarter. It also had dual joystick ports. The Spectrum Plus 3, when it came out in '87, they actually replaced the cassette drive with a 3-inch floppy disk drive. So that's where that one
Did
changed.
did one of them provide Kempston joystick ports as opposed to the proprietary Sinclair?
That's a good question. Let me see if any of that says it. Uh,
Because like when you're playing a game, it'll always ask you, do you want to play with the keys? Do you want to play this? Not always, but often keys, a Sinclair joystick, or a Kempston. And Kempston is just a fancy way of saying Atari. So if
oh,
you
got
got a
it.
joystick that's compatible with an Atari, that's Kempston. So I
Uh, n-
suspect that maybe they added a Kempston joystick to port to one of these.
They must have, but I'm not seeing it in the information I found. So I don't know which one would have potentially gotten that.
I'm gonna go
So
mobile real quick here. Can you see this div MMC?
yes, I can see that.
Okay, so this is a modern add-on, and you can see a little SD card slot there, and those
Yep,
are Kempston joystick ports.
I
This
see it.
allows
Yeah,
me to load software off of a card, and it also allows me to connect Kempston joypads or joysticks. This is just an example of the kind of, and this is one of Don's custom jobs. He painted this green, which
nice.
ZX Spectrum purists were very upset the first time I posted this. I'm like, listen, I didn't paint it. I just bought it like this personally. I kind of
Yep.
like it, but it is not. It did not come in this shade at all.
Well, then
Um,
you have yourself a unique Spectrum. That's all. There is the
so
original.
this now this is the plus three,
Oh,
and this
well, an
one is
original
unique
plus three. Yes.
because it had a floppy drive.
Yep.
So rather than tape, it was a 3 inch, not three and a half, 3 inch floppy disk. And it may have been similar to the disk format that was used in the what do you call it? The Nintendo disk system.
Oh, the Famicom disk system.
Yes.
Got it. In terms of the actual software on it, over 24,000 software titles were released for the Spectrum. And this is all like programming software and things like that. But roughly around 2,000 games were released.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about it is, like you said, like we talked about, like how a majority of the things that were released on this were built off of cassettes. You like the way you had used to have an audio cassette to listen to music. Games were released on a cassette. You put the cassette in, but other ways that you were able to get games for this were at the time, they would give program listings in magazines and books. So if you had a subscription to
Yeah.
a computer magazine, it would literally give you the code where it's like here, and you would type the program into your Spectrum. And if you did it correctly and ran it, it would work. And then you could save it to a cassette tape, so you don't have to type it in again. You just run the cassette again. And which I always find this interesting and entertaining. There were radio station broadcasts that would actually broadcast
Yeah.
the game, and you would record it onto a cassette tape and then throw it in your Spectrum, which is kind of awesome.
I mean, there was also a lot of people copying tapes. That was a
That was
thing.
another thing.
However, they
Yep.
still managed. I mean, we had a big problem with piracy in the US, people copying discs and stuff. But the difference was here, kids were copying games that would have cost $20 to $50. And it's understandable for a kid to pirate that back because $20 to $50 in 1980s money is like 50 to 75 or $80 probably today, right? It's a lot of money for a
Hmm.
kid. So because they were on tape, like here's Paperboy, and actually a pretty good version of Paperboy. The reason that I think piracy is a little less of an issue was, well, for one, companies weren't sitting on stock that cost them 10, 15, $20 just to put the box and the discs and all that
Hmm.
together because that stuff was really expensive. These tapes were really cheap to produce for the companies, and then they tended to sell them for like £3. So like the equivalent of maybe $10 today or $8. So a kid would go to the store, and it was a lot easier to convince their parents to spend $8 on Paperboy than to go to a computer store rather because they buy these at the grocery store and spend for the same game on disc with a box and everything, double or triple that.
Yeah.
So it really made gaming much more affordable. I mean, you compare this to Nintendo games of that era, this is so much cheaper.
Oh,
Now,
insanely cheaper.
you could argue that if you're taking the games on the ZX Spectrum and you put them side by side with a Nintendo Entertainment System game, obviously the Nintendo Entertainment System is going to be great, but gaming, if it really comes down to what you have access to. If all you have
Hmm.
access to is ZX Spectrum, that's all you know, you're going to think it's amazing. Because if you look at some of these games critically, I'll be the first to admit a lot of them don't hold up well. But if it's all you have, Like, think of how many games we played on like calculators back in the day.
Yep.
Obviously, that's not going to be the best version of any game,
Nope.
but you still have fun, right? Or on an old Palm Pilot or whatever. And it was the same thing with these. So a lot of it come down to imagination, lowering of
Yep.
expectations, but also economy, right? This is so much cheaper.
Yep.
And
Like
there were AAA releases that cost more. So
hmm
here's an example, and it's got the price tag on it still. It was £10. This is a boxed copy of Double Dragon. And
That's
one of the
awesome.
reasons why this was more expensive is this was coded very well. It's a better version of Double Dragon than you would expect on these kinds of systems. But inside, it's still going to be a tape, I believe. Let's see.
Yeah,
It might
even
be two tapes.
with all the fancy packaging, you're just coming down to a tape.
Two tapes.
Two tapes. There you
Yep.
go. The one thing that I did find about the games, like of the 2000 plus games on there, there was a magazine. You might know the name of them. You might know this magazine. There was a magazine called Games Master that ran around for
Oh
25,
yeah.
who had a list of the top 10 um, the top 10 ZX Spectrum games in, in their opinion. I think you're showing off something else there, but we'll get to that in a second. But just some of the games, some of the top 10 games they had on their list, which you may know, you would probably know better than I do. I had to look up a few of these, but some of the ones that I knew were like R-Type, Jet
Oh
Set,
yeah.
Jet Set Willy, which was kind of a sequel to Manic Miner. Renegade,
Dizzy.
Dizzy is on the list. Yep.
Yep. Yep.
The Egg,
The egg guy.
Dizzy the Egg. Another game called Head Over Heels, which I think they had listed
Oh,
as the best game on the Spectrum.
yep. Yeah.
And then a couple other ones like School Days, Night Lore, The Way of the Exploding Fist, and my personal favorite on the list, only because I love Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, which was released on the
Yeah.
Spectrum.
Yeah. Familiar with all those. Those are all pretty decent games. School Days is really bizarre and interesting. I think you would probably find that one a worthy game to try out if you ever pick up one of these.
Yeah, I read a little bit about like just the plot of it, and just really quickly,
Yeah.
this is from Wikipedia. The game features the player as a schoolboy named Eric, whose objective is to steal his report card out of the staff room safe by accomplishing various tasks around the school.
Yeah, that was pretty complicated for, a ZX Spectrum game on tape. And the latter releases got more and more complicated. Another one was Frankie Goes to Hollywood, I think was the name of it. That was pretty popular.
Like the band.
Literally like the band, yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
I wonder if that was related to that.
It was.
It was literally related to the band. That's kind of funny though.
Yep. Yep.
Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I love it. But just,
Yeah.
yeah, flipping through the list here, like I see Back to the Future games. There was the Friday the 13th game. Like there are a lot of crossover games from other,
Yep.
that you would see on other consoles. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. The game puts the player in Liverpool in search of the Pleasure Dome. The player has to find and use various objects and play mini games to reach that goal. Oh my gosh, that's funny. And it had a special live recording of their hit song "Relax." So
Mhm.
there you go. It's kind of awesome. But that's pretty much all the information that I have on the ZX Spectrum. John, is there anything else that you want to add before we jump over to our conversation with Don?
I'll just say this. I get that this is an obscure thing for most of your listeners, ZX Spectrum or any of these British computers. But they're all easy to at least try via emulation. So I would say, first temper your expectations. This is, you're not getting. Um, I was going to say you're not getting Contra, but there actually is a knockoff version of Contra, at least for the CPC. But
Not
anyway,
surprising.
you're not going to get like AAA 8-bit Nintendo action necessarily, but there's a quaintness to it, and it's if you enjoy history of video games like I do, and assuming since you're listening to Anthony's podcast that you do as well, it's worth it to pick up an emulator, and some of these games are very very small. You could probably download every game ever made, in 20 minutes. There's archive.org or whatever, I'm sure has them. But it's worth a shot.
Yeah.
The list that Anthony gave, is spot on. Those are probably a great place to start. Really cool one. I would newer games would be like I think Old Towers one. That's on a number of systems, but it's a good version. Buzzsaw is like a Tetrisy kind of game that's really fun. And then Castlevania. Those are like my three. Glump is another one.
Glump.
There's a couple. Yeah, there's some really good modern games that have been produced and are constantly being produced for the Spectrum, for the CPC 464. Try that out too. I know we're talking a lot about the Spectrum. They're
Mhm.
very similar systems. They have the same CPU, the Z80 Spectrum, the Z80 CPU, Z80 CPU, and they both have similar amount of RAM. The CPC's got slightly better graphics, and well, the sound I'd say is better, but it's pretty much the same sound chip once you get the later, like the 1280 models. But that's all I've got to say.
All right, very cool. Well, and then on the heels of that, we're going to turn this over to our interview with Don Crawford, where we're going to get a little bit more in-depth detail of not only the ZX Spectrum, but other British-based computers. The Retro Gamers Podcast is brought to you by Old School Gamer Magazine. Sign up for as little as $20 per year for 6 issues that include feature articles, interviews with retro programmers, new and old product reviews, and more. If you look carefully, you'll even see an article or two penned by yours truly. You can head over to oldschoolgamermagazine.com/retrogamerspodcast and sign up so they know where you heard about it. Old School Gamer is dedicated to you, the old school retro gamers from the arcades to your home. Obviously, welcome John back to the show.
And we got Don Crawford.
And we have Don Crawford with us, new to the podcast. Don,
Thanks.
welcome.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me to do the show with you. This is awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to have you because you're going to offer a very unique perspective that for once will not come from John.
Yeah, Don here, for those not in the know, if you are at all into computer gaming, vintage computer gaming, Don in the United States is kind of, from my perspective, and a lot of people I know's perspective, the go-to guy for knowledge and repairing vintage 8-bit British computers. So think the ZX Spectrum, that sort of thing, Amstrad ZX81s, things like that. Don is the man for all things British.
So when we rebelled and threw all the computers off of the
In
ships
Boston.
in Boston,
Yeah.
like you fixed
I was
those?
the guy that swam
Yeah.
down there and got them and
Nice.
restored them and brought them back to life. Absolutely.
Well, you are a good man.
Yeah, it's sort of a random thing that ended up happening with me and British Computers. I go back a long ways. Back in 1982, I bought my first computer, which was a Timex Sinclair TS1000. That was really not considered a British computer because Timex sold it, but all the innards and everything about it was built by a company called Sinclair in England. And being fascinated by the computer as I was, I just needed to know everything about it and how it was designed and built. And that sort of led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole in British computers. So back then, their next iteration of computers, the ZX Spectrum, one of the more popular computers that were ever built and sold in the world, was the first color computer available from Sinclair. And I was excited about the opportunity of them shipping it here to the United States like they had done with the TS1000. Unfortunately, that never really happened. Timex decided to make an iteration of that computer, built it in Portugal with the rest of them, but that was sold in the United States not very successfully, and shortly thereafter, Timex disbanded their computer division. But it was always one of my goals, and I always wanted one of those British computers. So as I got older and in time and I guess monetary things were better for me, I jumped into importing and restoring started with Sinclair computers. And from there, I just decided, well, why not get the rest of the British fleet from the 80s? And that's sort of how I got things started. I mean, John and I met. He actually bought one of my restored Spectrum computers, and we began to talk years ago about the computers. He had some questions, we had some challenges, we had some other computers, and that's how we got to know each other, which is really the cool part about the retro community, is that there's so many people out there that have like interests, and you get to meet so many really interesting people. And so from that original Spectrum, orders and starting to repair those, COVID came along, and I had a lot more free time on my hands. And
That's with a lot of us.
Oh, yeah.
well, and earlier John and I were talking, and my wife is traveling with me, and of course she was lamenting the week after week of boxes showing up at our front door from importers coming in from England, right? And so I have bought and restored, the Amstrad line of computers, for example. I've bought and restored an Oric Atmos, which is a really, really pretty rare British computer, especially over here as it was never shipped. The BBC Micro, which is really nothing more than an Acorn computer that was rebadged for the BBC. And then the Acorn Electron I also got as well. And I pretty much got most of that original 8-bit fleet from England. So
let me ask you a question.
Yeah. Sorry,
you got
the
all
history.
these. No. So we've talked a little bit about a couple different computers, Amstrad and the CPC, which competed with the we say ZX Spectrum. It's, if you look it up on the internet, ZX Spectrum. In the UK, they pronounce ZZ.
Yep.
So, in respect to those who produced the thing, we generally refer to it as ZX Spectrum. So, like, for the people at home, the ZX Spectrum competed with the Commodore 64, and probably to a slightly lesser degree also the Commodore, not PET, the VIC-20, right?
You could argue also the Atari series of computers at the same time, right?
But not so much in the UK.
Not so much in the UK. In the UK, the Spectrum competed directly against, the Commodore 64. That was the big thing. And in fact, today, there's still a lot of anxiety about, are you a Commodore person or are you a ZX Spectrum person? So
the thing about, what in the UK, take us back to when did the ZX Spectrum come out, and why would you have picked it over, say, a Commodore 64 or a VIC-20?
So the Spectrum came out somewhere in 1981, 1982. The driving force was cost.
Okay.
I mean, at the time, computers were very expensive, right? I mean, you looked at what an Atari 800 would go for, back then, $1,200, $1,400.
Sure.
Very expensive and that was an affordable home computer back at the time.
Sure.
So inside of England, when the ZX Spectrums came out, they were 179 pounds to 199 pounds, right around that, depending on when you bought it. And that was very affordable. Yeah. And, it was the very first affordable color computer in England. Yep. And they just flew off the shelves, right? And there's something about that little tiny square box. And it is one of the things that I still like about it today. There's a personality to that little box. The little rubber keys, the small form factor, the loading of games from tape and that kind of thing.
Why did they go to tape?
Again, all cost related stuff. Later on, they actually released tiny micro drives, which are smaller cassette drives, similar to what floppy drives would do, just in a smaller form factor and cheaper. But cassettes really were the mechanism in which they sold software, because it was cheaper. It was cheaper to build the technology into the computer itself, cheaper to distribute software. And when it came out, I mean, overnight, the sales were crazy. And overnight, there were 100 different companies like building software, right? Yeah. And reproducing software and putting it on a cassette and slapping a label on it was inexpensive. And they sold tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of some of these games overnight because of the industry that just sort of blew up in England because of the Sinclair.
Yeah, we've talked about it briefly here before. We talk constantly. You've talked about the video game crash of '83.
Oh, I always talk about that.
Frequently.
One of my favorite topics.
When you talk about it, always irritates.
It always goes to ET though.
It always goes to ET.
Which is not
we
true.
gotta let it go. We gotta let that go, right? So ET.
We can't. They dug it up.
They literally dug it up.
So we can't let it go.
They literally dug it up so that we can let. I mean, circling back, the reason was, and this goes back to Atari and their mismanagement of when they released the 2600. They built it in such a way that it allowed for third-party software developers to make software for that device. And when it became so popular, every mom and dad, every company, there's hundreds of companies releasing just terrible games for the 2600. So it blew up. But we're getting off the point of my Spectrum.
No, that actually is a good point, because ZX Spectrum, Amstrad, CPC 464s, these were very inexpensive computers that loaded their software off of tape. And one of the main advantages of tape, and I think we talked about this previously, is that these tapes were so inexpensive to produce. So you could put your whole game on a tape. Now, the downside is it would take 10 minutes to load your game. But if your game sold poorly, the producer of that game's out $1 a tape. Maybe,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
What were you out?
It doesn't wipe the company
So
out.
if ET doesn't sell, what are you out per cartridge? If
Oh, tons of money.
like $20 a cartridge, something like
lot.
that.
And of course,
1980s money.
1980s money. And of course,
especially when you produce more than actual systems that have been sold. That's
Yeah.
a bigger problem
Yeah.
too.
that's what Atari did with Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
They
made
honestly thought it would sell consoles.
more
and
consoles.
boy, were they wrong.
They were way off base, and it just destroyed the company. And it's understanding too. That's one of the reasons. I mean, from a quality control standpoint, and writing really good quality software, it had Atari just spent a little more money for a little bit more space on those ROM chips.
Yep.
To go from 4K to 8K, for example, the quality of games would have grown.
But ROM cartridges were those chips were so expensive.
I understand.
And that's why you got the version of Pac-Man you did on Atari 2600, which,
exactly.
by the way, has now come back for the 40th anniversary. I don't know if you've seen that. Atari is putting out a whole Pac-Man line with an Atari.
I saw that.
And
Yep.
the
yellow 2600.
The yellow 2600 and all the controllers of the color
The
of the
2600
ghosts.
plus, yeah.
And they're releasing the original Pac-Man again, and like everybody's like going crazy over this. I was like, does anybody remember how bad that game was?
So the thing
Some do.
I mean, it's not like the Spectrums and Amstrads were immune to quality control issues. A lot of the games that were submitted to the public were garbage. But you were out £2 or £3 for your game as opposed to $40 for a game that's garbage. So that's the one thing. I will say there's much more quantity than quality when it comes to these 8-bit British computer games. However, it's neat from my perspective digging into these. None of us grew up with these British computers. We're all coming to them after the fact.
Yeah.
And it's neat it's like looking for that diamond in the rough. And there's some really neat diamonds in there.
There's some great pieces of software. It is interesting too that during that time period, the gaming magazine industry in Britain really started to explode, primarily because there was so many different titles that many of the consumers would go to these magazines first and read through the reviews. And there's entire great articles about how powerful these magazines became because of the fact that they could kill or explode a game just based on a review that they did. But a lot of the consumers in England at the time used them because there were so many different titles that are available to them. They just needed to figure out which ones they really wanted to get.
And the British get really annoyed sometimes when Americans wax poetic about the near disaster of the entire game industry because of the video game crash. And in the UK, it just didn't happen. Yeah. They didn't have a video game crash because the console market never really took off until really much later in the UK. Yeah. People were using these very inexpensive microcomputers, these ZX Spectrum, the Dragon 32.
Dragon 32.
These really cool sounding computers that were very simple, cheaply made computers as double duty, as the home computer / game console.
Yes. In fact, it is interesting in that, Clive Sinclair, the guy that ran Sinclair Computer, Sinclair Research, he didn't embrace gaming. In fact,
he hated it.
He hated it up until as the company started to falter a little bit. He looked at that as being, hey, we now need to embrace it because this is
survival.
This is survival. We need to continue to sell.
What was the movie where that comes up?
Microman is the name of the movie where he is talking to his team about how frustrated he was about the Spectrum itself. Was everyone was using it as a gaming system, and he really thought of it as as more of a business system, which his next computer, the Sinclair QL, was meant to basically go after IBM PC and the Apples at the time, to really go after and target that business market. And it was a monumental flop.
It did about as well as the Apple III.
It did about as well as the Apple III.
Yeah.
Only
the what?
Yeah,
so
exactly. So
exactly.
So yeah, one of the very first computers that I got my TS1000 restored again was I shipped a QL to my house because I always wanted a QL. Don't know why, but I wanted a QL, got a QL, and it needed a lot of work.
So there's a reimagining. There's a group of people that came together and came up with a new spec, imagining what the ZX Spectrum, the next version of it would have been like had the company survived. And it's called ZX Spectrum Next. And they had their third iteration. They have done 3 batches now, and I finally paid for the third batch. So in December, hopefully, I'll get the ZX Spectrum next.
Next 3. Yep.
Yeah, and it is significantly more powerful and capable than original ZX Spectrum. But there's so much development. Like, it's going back to the bedroom coders that were so popular in the UK in the 80s.
Yeah, one of the and for those of you out there that haven't paid attention to it, go on Kickstarter. The Kickstarter for the 3 is over, but they're still available on eBay and other places. Really, I've got the 2 at home.
Yep.
The 3 is, like I said, hopefully we get it in December. The level of detail and quality for these machines is spectacular. Yeah, they still maintain that look and that feel, that that sort of that personality that the original had.
Yep.
But with so much more additional hardware capability, and I find it really fascinating and exciting to know that some of those original software developers, right?
Yep.
Like Jeff Minter from Llamasoft, for example.
Yep.
He's doing a bunch of games for the system, and it's great to see some of those original software developers jumping back in, and the system will still play all of that original software that was developed back then, which is exciting. The KS3 is doubly exciting in that because of the technology they use, they're actually generating and allowing additional core pieces of hardware. So, much to the chagrin of a lot of English Spectrum fans out there, the KS3 has a Commodore 64 core.
And a Sinclair QL.
And a Sinclair QL, as well as the ZX81 black and white.
The 2 kids in the playground.
Oh yeah,
there's
there's a bit of angst going on right now in the community because of the fact that never the twain shall meet was sort of like the philosophy, right?
The versatility of this third batch of ZX Spectrum Nexus is really
spectacular.
It's amazing.
It really is. They've really done a great job with the hardware and the fact that it is fully backward compatible with the original pieces of equipment. There was some additional hardware pieces that came out near the end of Sinclair Research's demise with their computers. But
so they got 10,000 systems out in the first 2 batches of this new computer.
Wow. Okay.
And
that's
I
impressive.
think they might have about 10 more coming in this third batch. So there could be potentially 20,000 of these things out there. They left it open source, and so some people have made some variants of this as well. If you can't get this is by far the nicest cosmetically way to get a ZX Spectrum Next, but there are other ways to get a ZX Spectrum Next equivalent. Other people are selling. And this is a really good system. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for developers to continue. And Don here, you've developed some games, not for the Spectrum.
Not from the Spectrum.
But his predecessor.
Yeah, we did.
Or not his predecessor. Yeah,
his ZX81. TS1000. So my best friend and I actually, in a crazy story, started working on a Donkey Kong version for the ZX81 back in 1982.
Also explain, because I've heard the story, but explain what the limitations are of the ZX81.
Well, you're very limited on memory, right? So you've got about 16K maxed out memory of the actual machine itself, which, boy, sounds like a lot, but 16 whole K, right? And there are limitations with how the machine works. So very similar to the 2600, the actual processor does dual duty, right? It's actually running the programs, but at the same time, it's generating the screen, right? So there's some really good books out there about 2600. Chasing the Beam is a perfect book to read if you're interested in 2600 development, but it talks about how the hardware generates the screen. So there's a lot of limitations on what can be done on a ZX81/Timex Sinclair 1000. But we started a game in 1982. And then, kept working on it. At the time, we had a hardware Z80 assembly language software program that plugged into the back. Had to type everything in on that little tiny square keyboard. We didn't have development tools at the time.
That must have been torturous.
It was torturous, absolutely torturous. And of course, saving it on tape to making sure we had it.
For those not aware, also, sorry to interrupt, Z80 is your CPU.
Correct.
So this is the brain of the computer, like the 6502 is the brain of a Commodore 64, or a variant of it, or even a variant of it for the Atari 2600. So Z80 is just the CPU that the Spectrum chose.
Nearly all of the home computers of that era, the 80s era, the 8-bits, were either the 6502 or the Z80.
Yeah.
Right? And it just depended on what the people that you had that could develop, depending upon the processor that you had. But
like Apple IIs were 6502.
6502, right? Yeah. So we kept moving along. We're younger, we're in college, and then you're moving along and you're starting your life, and the software just didn't quite get done. And over time, we would revisit it and try to work on it. And then finally, during COVID, we just made the decision. We're all going to be at home with a lot of time on our hands. We decided to sit down and we almost rewrote the game from scratch because we were never happy about some of the engines that we had running certain things, but we got it done and released it to the community, and it got generally positive reviews from the people.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was great. We actually there's a YouTube video out there on how to play the game.
Nice.
We got a magazine review on the game, which was all done unbeknownst to us. So that was actually pretty cool. And he and I right now are slowly working on a high resolution game, sort of a version of Robotron 2084, which is
very nice.
way outside of the capability of the computer, but we've been very creative in how we're using the software to make things look on the screen and work.
Yeah.
It's very, very complicated, but it's been a lot of fun. So we hope to get that done in the next year or so. We called it, Robotac 2024 to tell you when we wanted to get it done. So we're listen, it took us 42 years for the first one. So,
well, it's also very easy to change the year too.
I know, to go into the graphics and change it. So it tells you a little bit about.
Or just put like a plus, like 2024 plus 2.
The speed in which we get software development done. But yeah, it's still a great community. I think we'll transition ourselves as well into the next once we get through this cycle. He and I are still doing hardware projects for the ZX81. We're actually working on they released a control cartridge for the 1500. Didn't sell many of them. They had games on cartridge, and so they're extraordinarily rare.
Oh, wow.
And so we got our hands on one, and we are working on reproducing that for a small, whatever the people in the community that may want.
In the simplest terms, like it was the easiest way to get software loaded onto a Z81 or a Timex Sinclair 1000.
Yeah, this would easily be the easiest way to do it. You had to use a cassette player.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, if you've ever run a TS1000, the mechanism to actually load up software is actually through the same mechanism that drives the video display.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're loading software, the display goes away, and it's just a series of black and white lines constantly over your screen. And never forget, growing up working on these things, you could sort of tell if your software was going to load based on the iteration of the screen. You just sort of knew based on how the screen. You knew. You're just so used to it. And boy, there's nothing worse than waiting 10 minutes for something to load up and it didn't load correctly, and you have to adjust the volume, and God, the good old days. But
do you use phones or
absolutely. So right now there are so many bits of software for those of you that do have the ZX Spectrums here. There's a great ZX Spectrum software loader, and actually has every game you could possibly imagine. You can just look it up, plug it into your phone, and load it.
Now that sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Where I can just load everything.
It is really, really cool. I still am old school enough that I've got boxes and boxes of old games, and I still like loading them the old-fashioned way, just because of the experience. But it's so much easier anymore. And of course, every retro computer now, to some degree, has some sort of SD card loader system for it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Which that's the way to go. It just is. It's just the way to go.
For my CPC 464, that's the main. Well, even for the ZX Spectrum, that's what I'm using. However, I did go and buy from Blast from the Past, which is one of the greatest video games / vintage toys / vintage movies / vintage music store ever. It's in Long Island. Blast from the Past is fantastic, and I bought off of them this carousel of 100 Amstrad CPC games on tape.
Wow.
And every once in a while, I have all these games I could load very quickly using an adapter that is modern. But every once in a while, I just want the tape. I want that experience.
Yeah. Well, no, there's something about going back and actually experiencing what it used to be like, or whether you had it or not when you were younger. There's nothing like it. There really isn't anything like it.
No. And with the original ZX Spectrum, they modified the computer so when they loaded cassettes, that those bars were on the outside part of the screen, and during the actual load process, they would have a graphic image of the game itself. It's just a static image that would show. It's basically advertising this game and how great it's going to be based on an individual page, but that's all part of the experience too.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people love, is that original screen that pops up while the game is loading. So
yeah. I got to ask you. You've got we've talked about the CPC 464. We've talked about the ZX81 and its follow-on, the ZX Spectrum. You've experienced all three.
Yes.
I'm putting you on a spot a little bit here.
Okay.
Can you give us what you would consider your top 2 or 3 games for each of those?
That was literally my question that was going to come out.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's
Your
okay.
spot.
I'm the game guy. You just totally stole my moment.
So
Thanks a lot.
so
Sorry.
as crazy as it sounds, I don't play a ton of the games.
Yep.
But I have some of my favorites, and one of my favorites is a game called Elite. It was a space game, and actually they had that on across all of the British platforms.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it was super popular in the UK.
Very popular game.
You wouldn't have Wing Commander without Elite.
You would. It's absolutely
wow.
true. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely true. Jetpack was as simple as the game was.
Is that a Rare game?
It's not. I think. Oh no.
No. The company Rare.
It is
Rare.
It's either Rare or Imagine. It was one of those two. It may have been purchased by one or the other, but that's a really, really fun game, and it's real simple to play.
What's the premise of Jetpack?
Basically, you're flying around, stuff is trying to hit you.
Yep.
You've got to collect fuel and drop it and create a rocket, and when you do, off you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're avoiding stuff while trying to build.
And of course, there's gravity,
Yeah.
so you're falling. So you've got to use your jetpack to stay in the air and collect other things that come through that are also, for points. It's not a complicated game, but it's even now I play it every now and then. It is still just fun to play.
Well,
right?
but that's the thing about games like back then. They were very simple.
Yes.
Like in terms of like, here's your goal. You
Yes.
got one little thing to do, and you just do that over and over again. But it gets more challenging as you go on. And to me, like, it's sometimes just the simpler games that are better. Like you see games that come out today, and it's like you got to sit there. Like I've literally sat like playing a newer game on like my PlayStation 5 for half an hour, watching a backstory, watching the opening.
I know.
And I'm like, when do I get to actually play?
That's sort of that's the equivalent of those 10-minute tape loads back in the day,
exactly
right?
what
You're going through the whole thing.
Yes.
There was not much to it. You just loaded up and jumped right in for those games for the most part. I still have an affinity for a lot of the text-based, Dungeons and Dragons type games from the area.
Growing up,
what
those would be the best text-based D&D type game?
Your favorite.
My favorite text-based game of all time is Zork. Zork.
I knew you were going to say Zork.
Zork was by far the best text-based game. The best, and we're starting to approach a little bit into some 16-bit space. But Dungeon Master was such a great game. Such a great game.
On the Atari ST?
On the Atari ST and also on the Amiga. Yeah, it was just so well done. They had some older versions that didn't quite do as well on some of the 8 bits. But
were you familiar with Eye of the Beholder?
I am familiar with it.
I wish I had taken time to show you, because at the house, because Don was at my house earlier, I have the Commodore 64/128 version that was recently created.
Yeah.
It's dual monitor.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So it has an auto map feature on the second monitor using a Commodore 128.
Oh, that's great.
That's really
good. That's some really cool stuff. Well, and that's what I like about the retro community right now, is that
so creative.
So creative. So many new things coming out. I mean, both from the hardware standpoint and the software standpoint, and they're being embraced. There's still people that just love these machines.
What they could eke out of the machines now is
that's
incredible.
How they stretch it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I could pick 3 random games from not so much the ZX81, because that's a very simple system.
Very simple.
But the ZX Spectrum and the CPC 464, which are probably 2 of the most popular, aside from the Commodore 64 8-bit computers in Britain. And I could show you like 3 games, and you think, oh, this is the most archaic, lame thing. But that just happens to be a lot of people just made very simple games. Mm-hmm. But I can also show you some homebrews. I call them homebrews, but they would have been knock out of the park commercial products had they been released back then.
Yeah.
Because they've had decades of previous programming tips and tricks they've learned from other programmers, like standing on the shoulders of giants, literally. Yeah. The stuff that they're able to do with the ZX Spectrum and a CPC 464 today is just incredible.
Amazing. It really is amazing. And it's, for me, it's exciting that people still are taking the time, and it takes time and energy, right? It is, and I've mentioned this to you, it's a labor of love when you're doing these things, right? You're not selling it to a potential, 10 million user base audience. It's a small audience. And 9 times out of 10, most of these folks are actually releasing them into the community for free, right? Here, enjoy this software, because I've worked on
a lot of it comes from Russia and Poland. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. By the way, huge ZX Spectrum community in Russia and Poland.
Yeah.
During the the Eastern Bloc countries at that time.
Yep.
You can find this hard to believe, but Russia was really good at stealing and copying technology. So hard to believe. So I am.
And it was such a simple architecture.
And it was.
If you're going to steal, and it'd be the easier one.
So in many cases, a lot of those Russian computers will byte for byte load up and run Spectrum software.
Yeah.
And so I am quietly waiting to pick up a couple of those Russian PCs and
Yeah.
add them to my Spectrum fold, which is
Nice.
it's
There
too
is
crazy.
such a huge development community in Russia and Poland that is just, they're churning out games that are just incredible. Like I played this little Tetrisy, yeah, I guess kind of the Buzzsaw one.
Yep.
Mhm.
I think it's called Buzzsaw. And you look at the graphics and the controls are so tight. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And for the ZX Spectrum. Was it another one called The Tower?
That one doesn't sound familiar to
I
me,
can't
but
remember.
there's a lot of new games that have come out.
I'm not as prepared for the
I
talk
know.
about the
For
games,
to talk
but
about the newer games.
There's
Yeah.
so many
and actually
newer ones.
and the community there in Poland is fantastic. So
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Polish Sinclair,
Yep.
because they combine both the ZX81 and the Spectrum, and these guys have done some amazing hardware.
Yeah.
So I sent you basically a motherboard that was developed by someone in Poland, and,
Yep.
and basically it's a new motherboard using CPLD technology, right? And
Yep.
there's a book out called Building a Microcomputer, and it basically details how the ULA, which runs that original ZX Spectrum, was built. And from that book, people use that to then take programmable logic chips and recreate the Spectrum. And so they built this motherboard using and it is a true replica. Everything's same thing with like the Next. It runs all the game and works with all the hardware.
Yeah.
Some really, really cool stuff that's going on in a lot of these other countries and a lot of other places with the hardware.
And if you do want to like look into some of the stuff we're talking about, one of the general repositories I think is itch.io.
Yep.
And you can search by system like
Yep.
ZX Spectrum Next, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC.
Uh,
So if you want to look at some of the games we're talking about,
Specky.pl
Specky.pl is
is
another
a
good
really
one.
good one. There's a lot of really good stuff there.
Yeah. There's so much development being done, and it really provides opportunity for the bedroom programmers
Yes.
again.
Mhm.
It's absolutely an exciting scene to be a part of.
Yeah, and I encourage anybody that wants to. So
And it's a lot of it's free.
it is free, and when I jumped in and got started, I didn't know anything, and
Yeah.
and there's so many people across the globe that are so knowledgeable on all these different topics in the hardware and software, and I have asked so many people questions, and they're gracious, right? They come right back. They're excited, right? Oh wow, this is awesome.
Because they love it and they want other
Yeah,
people.
They
Yeah,
want
they
other
want other
people to
people.
get
They want
involved.
other
The more the
other
merrier.
people to love
Yeah.
it too. And I've never run into a situation where somebody's come
Yeah.
back and say, no, I get paid to do this, so I'm not going to help you. Never once happened. Never
There's
once.
so many ways, and the great thing is, it's for me and for you as well.
Yep.
It's just curiosity. We wanted to know what was the gaming scene in the UK and Europe and Eastern Bloc countries like in the 80s and early.
Yeah.
I mean, really, a lot of these systems were used way beyond their prime in places like Poland and
Oh, yeah.
Russia because these people had no money, particularly as the curtain fell and the
Correct.
economies were in the garbage. So there's so much development. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
We got a phone call.
That was an alarm for something. I pick very obnoxious sounds, so I can tell it's that.
That's a good one.
Yes.
But back to my point, like there's so many ways to experience these. By all means, use emulators. If you don't want to put money
Yeah.
into it, there are so many great emulators that you can get. You can try these things out.
Mhm.
There's so many different systems that have come out that you can do this Kickstarter we were talking about. But there's a lot of other ways to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
Is my point. And the games often are free or very, very inexpensive. And if you're remotely curious about what was happening during the video game crash in North America and the years that followed while we waited for the Nintendo Entertainment System to come out, like that entire period, the gaming scene was vibrantly active
Yeah.
in the UK, and it was done on shoestring budgets,
Yes.
often produced by one or two people teams, and a lot of those guys have come up in the industry, and they're just juggernauts in the industry today. It's just some
there's no
really
question.
cool stuff.
There's no question. A lot of
Well, and they all keep coming around. Like, and
Yeah.
now everything's coming back again. Like,
Yeah.
you see how all these companies now are producing minis, right? We got
Yeah.
a mini Commodore 64, we got a mini Nintendo,
Yeah.
we got a mini Genesis.
There's the mini ZX Spectrum. It just never came here.
They actually just released a new Commodore 64. Someone bought up the rights to
Mhm.
Commodore 64 and just
Yes,
released.
I heard about that.
They just
Yep.
released a new.
Perifractics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Atari has been doing better the
Yeah.
last couple of years than they have done in in decades.
Oh, and forever. Yeah. They're gobbling up so many companies.
Correct.
Like, I feel like every couple of months you hear about another company
Yeah.
they just ingested.
Was it Retro Games Limited is coming out with a full-size Amiga 1200 replica?
Yep. Yeah.
Fully functional keyboard, and that is a great way to get into the Amiga if you don't want to deal with trying to repair vintage hardware.
Correct.
Well, there was also a mini Amiga. They did
Yep.
the mini Amiga. Was it 400?
500.
500.
Yep.
Yeah. So it the fact that it's just all out there, it's all available. Even sites like I was going to say like archive.org, you can find a bunch of stuff
Tons
on
of
there
stuff.
as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it just extends everywhere. And like you said, now the Spectrum Next.
Yeah.
Just another version of it for people to play today. So, and again, part of it also is going to be like a price related thing. Like if you want to go back and get the original, I mean, I don't think it's going to cost you a nickel. You know what I mean?
They're not expensive to be able to go back.
Really?
No, they're not terribly expensive.
So
I mean, the hardest
I'm going to
part.
wind up going shopping after this.
The hardest part, honestly, the hardest part for us is a lot of that cool technology is getting it back over to the States, right? And so that took me a little bit of work to get done.
Yeah,
And,
just hop over the pond, load up your suitcase.
thankfully, when I got started, I've got friends that live over there, and they did yeoman's work for me, shipping stuff back for me. But yeah, it's I mean, the barrier to entry into getting back into the retro gaming and whether it's British computers, you know, the Atari lines of stuff, the Commodore lines of stuff, and then moving into the ST and the Amigas, the barrier to entry is very low. They're not terribly expensive, and you can get the emulators, you can get the minis that are available.
Nice.
Like, you go on eBay right now, and you can find a lot of that older stuff as some of the newer stuff is being released. People are selling them, and you can get into it and learn about those things.
And we talked about gatekeeping, which is one of the more horrible aspects of whether it's video game like console stuff or vintage computers. You know, there's a lot of people say, "Oh, you're not real if you're not experience it."
Yeah.
No, I completely disagree. Try this out, however is easiest and most interesting to you. That's all that matters. And getting people excited to experience, you know, these games from, you know, a time period long ago, particularly some people weren't even alive that are listening to this podcast when these things were popular. And, you know, even those of us that were, we didn't experience it directly because it never made it here.
We couldn't.
The ZX81 is really the only kind of successful, but they didn't really get, the gaming scene didn't really kick off until the ZX Spectrum came out for
and that
Sinclair,
because of the fact that it wasn't compatible. The Timex Sinclair 2064, which was sort of their version, wasn't backward compatible. There was eventually a chip came out to allow you to play some of those. But
too little, too late.
Too late. It was already that's you know, song had already been.
Well, again, in our age back then, it's like it was whatever either you heard about or your parents knew. So like, you know, in my home, there was a Commodore 64 because that's what my dad knew.
Absolutely.
You know, he didn't know anything about the ZX Spectrum or anything like that.
Yeah. And so it's, you know, it's unfortunate that we didn't get a chance to really get our hand on some of those things, but you know, things worked out really well in the long run.
So now after you're done with Robotech in like 20 years.
Probably 20 years.
Is there another game that you kind of have on tap that you want to do?
So, I'm working on one that is an homage to a 2600 game called Mega Mania. Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that game.
I have the Atari cartridge.
As do I. It'll be a high resolution ZX81 version of that. In fact, we talk about the retro gaming community. I emailed Steve Cartwright, who was the original 2600 software designer for that game.
Wow. Yeah.
And he immediately got right back to me. And he's like, "Hey, that sounds exciting. I know that's a hard thing to do." And he's like, "Trust me, I understand how challenging it can be trying to develop the game for the 2600. So it was amazing to me that the original software developer got back to me immediately on a game that I'm building on a 40-year-old, you know, platform. But after that, I'm going to move into the next. The next seems like a logical next step, especially with the added capabilities and the function that you can do. It's not so far along that you need to have, let's just say, an entire group of graphics designers to help you build a game. You can still sort of do it in your garage like we did back in the 80s, but that's probably the logical next step. So
something like Temple of Apshai along those lines would be kind of neat.
Yeah, there's a lot of different options for games. I mean, and my best friend and I are old school guys, right? We like some of those old school games, and you know, they don't take a whole lot of explaining. You jump into the game and just start running around and doing stuff. So
and as I said, sometimes that's just the best time when you don't want to sit there and think about like, oh, how am I going to learn 16 buttons and all this stuff? I just want to play something simple for like 10 or 20 minutes or whatever it is. It's like, that's the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, there's no question. No question.
Don, this has been absolutely
Thanks for having
awesome.
me. This has
Thank
been
you
awesome
so
for
much
me
for being
too.
on. Like every time John's on, I learn a lot. I feel like I learned a ton.
He's way smarter than
Listen,
me.
No, that's not true.
No,
That's
it's
not
absolutely
true.
true.
Not true.
So,
Yeah, it
no.
is.
No,
No, but it was nice actually sitting here and hearing you guys go back and forth because there's like a ton of information flowing, and I'm just like I like to just sit back and learn. Would I pass the test if you gave me one? Absolutely not.
No, maybe.
Well, I'm gonna have to watch this like 4 or 5 times.
Go through it a couple
But
times.
really, no, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I hope you come back another time.
Definitely would love to.
Would
Will
love to
do.
hear more about the game when you're done.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, that's it for our show this week. I hope you enjoyed our discussion of the ZX Spectrum. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Don Crawford. I thought it was absolutely excellent. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I kind of just sat back and learned a lot from the two of you. So, John, I really appreciate you joining me for this special episode here.
Now, this has been great. Thanks, Anthony.
Yep, and for everybody else out there, we will catch you next time on the Retro Gamers Podcast.